Welcome. I'm your host, Malcolm Gallagher. From our BizVision studios in the UK, you're watching the BVTV network. My guest today has been causing me sleep problems. He's written a book that is so absorbing that I can't stop reading it into the night. I doze off and then I have to read the same bit again. But the stories that he tells in it, and there are many of them, are so compelling, I'll put up with the yawns during the day. What's the book about? Well, it's about Saudi Arabia, then and now, a country which attracts so much controversy, yet is a country with so much potential for global trade. Many of you watched my first interview with my guest, an interview where I knew afterwards there was much more that you wanted to know from this Saudi Arabia expert. So today I'm delighted to be welcoming back for a deeper dive into the kingdom, the author of the definitive book, Vision or Mirage, Saudi Arabia at the Crossroads. So let's go say hello again to David Rundell. Welcome, David.
It's a pleasure to be here with you again, Malcolm. I'm very sorry that I have been disturbing your sleep.
Yeah.
I'll try and write a more soporific book next time.
Yeah. Put me to sleep. But it is fascinating. I just love the little stories that you tell, and you can only tell those stories, David, from having the expertise that you've got. How many years have you been involved with Saudi Arabia?
Well, I've been involved with Saudi Arabia for 40 years.
Wow.
I went there in my 20s. I'm now in my mid 60s. So, it's been 40 years.
Wow.
Of that time, I actually lived there for 15 of my 30 years in the government service. And since I retired, I go there when COVID's not around. I go there every month. I used to keep an apartment there. I don't keep an apartment there anymore. But I'm still there a lot. So I've been involved with Saudi Arabia for a long time. I've seen a lot of changes.
Wow. David, I'm delighted you've kindly agreed to come back for another chat between us. I know how busy you are and I appreciate your time. In this second interview, I want to dive deeper into Saudi Arabia and chat about some, let's call them poignant areas. In this BVTV show, I'll be talking to David in three parts. I'm going to dive into political security and economic issues with questions and thoughts that may be going on in your head if you're thinking about trading with Saudi Arabia. First, I'll ask him to talk about political issues such as the news that keeps hitting out from front pages. In part two, we'll move to talking about security. As someone once said to me, Saudi Arabia is surrounded by the neighbors from hell. What's David's thoughts on that? And in part three, we'll have a serious talk on economic stability. Oil usage is dropping away as we all focus on climate around the world. Can Saudi Arabia move away from oil dependence? And if so, where's the opportunity for the likes of the UK and the US in future trade with the kingdom? So, David, let's start our talk in part one to talk about those political issues, such as the news that keeps hitting out at front pages about abduction of princesses. On 2nd of October 2018, Jamal Khashoggi, a Saudi dissident, journalist and columnist for the Washington Post, was allegedly assassinated by agents of the Saudi government at the Saudi consulate in Istanbul, Turkey. Now, that doesn't give the impression of political stability, does it? Yet our UK Foreign Secretary, Dominic Raab, again allegedly told staff this last week that restricting trade because of human rights abuses would mean missing out on growth markets. You're a very experienced diplomat. What would you say to business leaders watching this and worrying if trading with Saudi Arabia would sit well within their conscience? I leave that to you, David.
Well, I have a very clear view on that. And I basically agree with Dominic Raab. But I'll tell you in a little detail as to why I would say that. It's not a simplistic answer. It's not a yes or no answer. The principal job of your foreign secretary is to protect the prosperity and the security of the British people.
Mhm.
He also has a role as a champion of human rights and of the rule of law. And those are not only just good values, but promoting them is a source of influence for Britain. And to be seen as a champion of human rights.
Yeah. Yes.
But
So,
there is very often a tension between these two, which creates a dilemma for any leader as to how does he balance the interests of Britain and the values of Britain. And a policy that is exclusive to either of those is unlikely to be successful from either a practical point of view or from a point of view of maintaining public support for a foreign policy, which is essential in a democracy. If you abandon your values, you probably, in fact, probably you have less worth defending in your national heritage. But if you abandon your interests, you have no way of defending your values.
mhm.
So you need to find a balance between these. And I think that's important. And I think there are many people who take a very one-sided view of this and view it either as purely transactional or truly value-based, whatever word you want to use. And I think that you need to find a balance. I also think that in light of the document which was released this week about Britain's role in a global world, that makes it very clear that Britain needs partners.
Yes.
Partners that are security partners and partners that are trade partners. And one of the criticisms of Donald Trump was that he neglected some of our alliances. I don't think that accusation has been made against the British government, and I don't think that I would like to see it made, because Saudi Arabia has been an important ally of Britain for longer than it has been a friend and ally of the United States. And so to dismantle relationships which have proven helpful and have a potential to remain that way doesn't make a lot of sense. So I'll just be very quick here and say what are the things that Britain benefits from a relationship with Saudi Arabia? Well, certainly oil price stability is important to the global economy, and Britain has an important role, but is to some extent dependent on the success of a global economy. So the price of oil matters to global growth. The likelihood of resolving the Arab-Israeli dispute without Saudi support is not great. The Saudis have contributed and continue to cooperate with Britain on resolving the Arab-Israeli conflict, whatever you want to call that.
Yeah.
So there are many, and then I think the final one is that there are many British jobs that depend on trade with Saudi Arabia. And one of the things which I'd have to be clear, and I do find it a little bit annoying, that many of the people who will be marching down Regent Street with their placards, and I think I said this on the last talk as well, is that those people are not the ones that are going to go home and tell their wife they just lost their job.
That's correct. Yes.
In fact, most of them probably don't have a job because they're students. So I take those protests with a grain of salt. And I think that your government does as well. Not only is there an important tax element to these trade deals, but more importantly, there are people whose jobs and livelihood depend on this. So I think that has to be taken into consideration. So at the end of the day, this is not to pretend or to try to be evasive of the issues which you have mentioned, and which these people, perhaps the ones I disparaged slightly walking down Regent Street, they get in my way sometimes, I have to tell you. I'm trying to go shopping, and I get whatever parade they're having there, I can't go where I'm trying to go. But in any event, the assassination of Jamal Khashoggi, the detention of political dissidents, the war in Yemen and the human cost of that, the conflict, if you want to call it, the boycott of Qatar, all of these things are things which people have found distasteful, unpleasant, evil, whatever word you, I mean, they obviously they range there. There's a wide range of things. A boycott of Qatar and the murder of Jamal Khashoggi are fundamentally different events, but there's a range. People are upset about many of those things. I'm not pretending that they shouldn't be. What I'm saying is that the ability to influence any of those things depends on having an engagement with Saudi Arabia. And that and this is happening in America now, perhaps more than in Arabia, where there is an effort to reevaluate or recalibrate the relationship with Saudi Arabia. That would be useful only to the extent that it worries about shaping future behavior. It's not the job of the British government or the United States government to punish people for what they consider to have been egregious behavior in the past. It's much more important that we shape future behavior. So my reaction, I guess my answer is that you need to stay engaged with Saudi Arabia, and you have a much better chance of shaping their future behavior by remaining engaged with them.
That's a very, very astute comment, and I thank you for that. David, before we move to part two, I'd like to remind viewers and listeners of the title of your book, which is keeping me awake at night, Vision or Mirage, Vision or Mirage, Saudi Arabia at the Crossroads. I'll say that again for listeners, viewers, obviously you can see it on the screen behind me. Vision or Mirage, Saudi Arabia at the Crossroads. David, time for part two. Let's move to talking about security. As someone once said to me some time ago, Saudi Arabia is surrounded by the neighbors from hell. Could we suddenly see an Islamic insurrection or other such problem? After all, any business leader thinking of having people in Saudi Arabia has also to think about the duty of care. What's your thoughts on this?
For most of the last 70 years, Saudi Arabia has been one of the safest countries that in the Middle East that you could do business with. I mean, there was very little crime, no terrorism except for a few years, which I will talk about in a minute. So most people, most of the time that I've been involved in Saudi Arabia, you had more to worry about being in a car accident than you did having to worry about anything of a violent crime. There was an Al-Qaeda insurrection between 2003 and 2007. We go into that. There's a chapter in the book on that. The Saudis were successful in, and one of the few places really that was successful in defeating the Al-Qaeda insurrection. And this was for many reasons, which we don't need to all go into detail here. But at the end of the day, it was because the Saudi people supported their government. And in the end of the day, it was because people on both the left and the right decided that the monarchy they had was better than the likelihood of being ruled by the Taliban or ISIS. So I think that, and there are still people in Saudi Arabia who would like to see a more Islamic government. Mm-hmm. It's hard to know how many. I would say probably 20%, 15, 20% of the people would support something like that. But they're under control. There has not been any domestic terrorism in Saudi Arabia for some time. And I don't think there's likely to be a revival of that insurrection for a lot of reasons. But so that is internally, I don't think there's going to be a revolution in Saudi Arabia today or tomorrow, and certainly in the next 5 to 10 years. People ask me somebody asked me the other day, what's Saudi Arabia going to be like in 50 years? I said,
Yeah.
I have no idea what America is going to be like in 50 years. So in any event, but I think 10 years you can be pretty realistic and say there wouldn't be a internal civil war or revolution in Saudi Arabia. Now, security has two parts. You've got internal security or internal stability, and you've got your neighbors. Again, for most of Saudi Arabia's history, they were very successful at keeping themselves out of wars. If you look at, very few Saudis were coming home in body bags. They were not involved in, you look at Egypt or Iraq and Iran and Syria, even Morocco. These countries, Lebanon, these countries were very, not only internally unstable, but they were involved in a lot of foreign wars. The Saudis were not. And this event in Yemen is a real aberration, but it's nonetheless real. And it is destabilizing. And the conflict with Iran is destabilizing. Now, and this comes back to the question of arms sales, which is on a lot of people's minds. The Saudis would like the war with the Houthis to end. They didn't start the war, but they have genuine security concerns on their southern border. So they're going to need to find some way to compromise with the Houthis, but they're already trying to do that. And cutting off arms supplies to the Saudis is counterproductive for two reasons. First of all, they already want the war to end. You don't need to twist their arm to get them. They have a lot of domestic reform that they are trying to undertake, which we can talk about. It's called Vision 2030. That costs a lot of money. Every dime they spend, or every pound or shilling they spend in Yemen, is money that they can't spend on their own reform, and their future depends on their reform. And the stability of the country depends on the success of these reforms. So they would like that war and that expense to go away. The second reason that it's counterproductive is that it certainly, if you're going to have a negotiated settlement, telling the Saudis you're not going to sell them any more weapons is very unlikely to make the Houthis want to negotiate. In fact, all it does is make the Houthis say, oh, well, now the Americans and the Saudis and the British aren't going to help the Saudis, so we'll be able to defeat them even more easily. So it may make you feel good. It may be a virtue signaling exercise. But in terms of practical reality of bringing either the Houthis or the Saudis to encouraging either one of them to negotiate, it's absolutely the wrong thing to do. So I think that the Saudis do face external security threats at the moment. I don't think they're going to be invaded. I think the United States has continued to make it clear that and this is something we made clear many, many times in the past, that we have a relationship which would defend them from external aggression. That relationship does not, and never has, stated that it would defend them from their own people. Right. So we're not going to get involved in some civil war or some demonstration as they had during the Arab Spring. But if they're invaded by Iraq or Iran, we would come to their defense. And I think that remains the essence of Saudi security and Saudi stability from foreign foes. And I would imagine that Britain, although I don't know this but for a fact, but I would imagine that Britain has some sort of tacit agreements with the Saudis as well. And certainly they have a long-standing defense relationship.
Brilliant. Yes. A very astute comment again. Thanks, David. Now, for part three, let's have a serious talk on economic stability. Oil usage is dropping as we focus on climate around the world, climate change to electric cars and vehicles and so on. Can Saudi Arabia move away from oil dependence? And if so, where's the opportunity for the likes of the UK and the US in future trade with the kingdom? I just read from this week's recent Global Britain document from Boris Johnson, and it said we will enhance collaboration in areas such as life sciences and green technology with Saudi Arabia. What are the competing countries are trying to court business from Saudi Arabia, and what is it we need to learn and condition ourselves to if we are to be successful in trading with the kingdom?
Well, I think I would make 3 points. The first is that oil demand on the planet is not likely to decline. That the United States and Europe could completely eliminate could go completely carbon neutral, and the rest of the world is still going to need oil. Again, it's simply inaccurate to think that, all of a sudden the world's not going to need oil. And that's not my personal opinion. That's that you go and look at the International Energy Agency's numbers. They believe that, as it has done in the past, that oil demand will continue to grow for certainly the next couple decades, and roughly 1% a year. Now, what's happened is that the relationship between GDP growth and oil consumption has decoupled to a considerable extent. So and this is true in the United States and in Europe, that we're now, it used to be, I'm making up the numbers, but, for every $1 of new GDP, you needed another barrel of oil. And now it's, you can do it with 3/4 of a barrel of oil. And the ratios are about right. The numbers aren't. So that's that. In that sense, you're using less oil, but you're still going to grow your economy. Mm-hmm. And unless you want to, and there are people who don't want economic growth, but those are, again, people who are probably already have a color TV and a refrigerator and 2 cars. There are a lot of people who don't have those things on this planet, and they want them, and they're going to try and get them, and they're going to require economic growth in order to get them. So I don't think oil demand is going down anytime soon. I also would say that when oil demand does begin to go down, and it may eventually, as Zaki Yamani, who just passed away, used to say, the Stone Age didn't end because we ran out of stones, which is true. So someday we may have other ways of producing energy other than hydrocarbons, which I include gas in that as well, which is a very clean way to produce electricity, as many of your listeners probably know. But the point I would make there is that Saudi Arabia's production and transportation costs for oil are amongst the lowest in the world. And so the last commercially produced barrels of oil on the planet are going to come from Arabia. So long after the North Slope of Alaska and the North Sea have dripped dry, they'll still be producing oil in Saudi Arabia. So right now, Saudi Arabia has roughly 40% of its GDP coming out of oil. I think that can be reduced, but I don't think it will be eliminated. You've got a very diversified economy like Norway, where oil is still 20% of GDP. So I think that the Saudis will bring it down, but they're not going to make it insignificant. It will always remain a very significant part of their GDP, and there's nothing wrong with that, because countries like Australia or Canada are also very dependent on natural resource exports, and they're perfectly functioning, fine economies. So I think, but I do think the Saudis will try and are trying to diversify. And that's for a whole range of reasons. One is to create jobs. Two is to stabilize their economy. They don't want it to be totally dependent on or heavily dependent on very variable prices of oil, and they don't want their government revenues to be fluctuating to the extent that they do now. So they are trying to diversify. They will try and diversify, and people who can contribute to that will be welcome. And so those people who are seeking to do business in Saudi Arabia should, I think, look at three things. They should look at things that can diversify away from oil. They should look at things which can create jobs, and they should look at things which can transfer technology. All of those are things which the Saudis are looking for. And in addition to good quality and a reasonable price, if you can provide jobs or technology transfer and diversification of the economy, I think you will hit the sweet spot of what both the Saudi government and the Saudi private sector are looking for. In terms of sectors that specifically relates to, you mentioned the green economy. Saudis are serious about that. I don't know if most of your listeners are involved in that, but solar and wind are two things that the Saudis, again, have a competitive advantage in. I mean, they have a lot of desert and they have a lot of sun. And the truth is that the same solar panel will produce 3 times as much electricity in Saudi Arabia as it will in Germany in the course of a year, simply because of the sun. So to the extent that they are the central bank of global oil, they could indeed become one of the central banks of solar power. Solar power is difficult to transmission costs are still high, but there are ways that if they can make it price-wise competitive, and I think that's coming slower than many people think, but it's coming. They have a future in solar energy. They also have, it's less of a unique situation, but they also have wind. And one of the reasons that they built Neom, the new city, where they built it, is because that is in the way that these wind farms classify their levels of wind. They are in one of the higher levels. I think there were 5 levels, and they're in level 4. So unless you're in the Himalaya mountains, you're not going to be in level 5. But so they have a section of their country which is quite good for wind as well. So those are things which they would like to do. And one of the reasons they would like to do it is because it leaves them more oil to export. If they can make electricity without burning up their own oil, and that was a problem. That has been an issue, that they're burning up a lot of their own fuel, which means less that they can sell. So they would like to see that. And they've started to run some of their desal plants, still on a pilot level, but they're running some, and they rely heavily on desalinated water. And at the moment, they mostly burn oil to boil the water. They will be trying, and they are successfully doing it on a small scale now with the solar energy. The other things that Saudi Arabia's diversification plan is trying to promote, biotechnology is certainly one of them. They have things that deal with desert agriculture, things that they like to do, things that deal with clean combustion. They are interested in cybersecurity. They're interested in artificial intelligence. All of these things, which are fairly, I think they're pretty predictable, are new areas. Where the areas where they have been buying a lot of things, and I don't know the British trade numbers as well as I know the American ones, but we sell them a lot of machinery. We sell them a lot of cars, and we sell them a lot of airplanes. We sell them a lot of military equipment. Those are and we sell them a lot of cigarettes too, which would be surprising. But so these are some of the major issues of things that actually trade between the countries in terms of physical goods. But if I were a British businessman, I would certainly be aware of the fact that much more of the world's trade is now in services than it used to be. And it's not just in goods anymore. So there are many services, from healthcare to retail to financial services, banking and insurance, which again, I'm sure you're well aware of those things, but those have been expanding, and they have become much more accessible and user-friendly, if you will, since Saudi Arabia joined the WTO. And so that the country is now much more open to services from abroad than it was in the past. So excellent. I think those would be the areas I'd be looking at.
Excellent, excellent. Across these two interviews, I've gained a much clearer understanding of why my guest David Rundell says that Saudi Arabia must be on your target list of export prospects. I've also gained a better understanding of the selection of lenses that you need to view another country through so that you have a complete analysis of both risk and opportunity. And for all of that, I'd like to say thank you, David.
Well, I thank you for the opportunity. It's the last thing I would say is that the Saudi Arabia is an interesting place to go to see it. It may not be quite as exotic as it was when I first got there, but it's still a very unusual, different place. And it's an interesting place to go and see, as well as to do business with. And there are now 4 or 5 of these UN cultural recognized sites in Saudi Arabia. So tourism is another area, and there are people promoting tourism to Saudi Arabia, and that's another export, but it's also something to think about if you're just going there to market widgets.
So, and let's hope we can do that soon at COVID controls. Thank you once again, David.
Take care. Bye-bye.